The summer of 1872 had already proven merciless across the Kansas territory, but nothing could have prepared Sarah Mitchell for what she would discover behind her barn on that scorching July morning. What started as a simple act of compassion would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about survival, honor, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between strangers from different worlds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drought had been relentless for 3 months when Sarah Mitchell first noticed the small footprints in the dust behind her barn. At 26, she had grown accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life in central Kansas, having managed her deceased husband's homestead alone for nearly 2 years since consumption had claimed Thomas in the winter of 1870. The 160-acre claim sat in a valley where Willow Creek had once provided reliable water, but now only cracked mud remained where clear water had flowed just seasons before. Sarah's daily routine began before dawn. As the oppressive heat made midday work nearly impossible, she would tend to her 3 remaining chickens, check the vegetable garden that stubbornly refused to produce anything but withered stalks, and pump the temperamental well that yielded less water each passing week. The isolation had become her constant companion, broken only by monthly visits from traveling merchants or the occasional neighbor riding the 15 miles from the nearest settlement of Cedar Ridge. The Mitchell homestead reflected Thomas's practical nature and Sarah's determination to honor his memory through perseverance. The modest 2-room cabin, built from local limestone and timber hauled from the Arkansas River bottoms, stood solid against the prairie winds that seemed to blow constantly across the endless grassland. A front porch provided shade during the brutal afternoon hours, while the kitchen garden, now mostly bare earth, occupied the space between the house and the weathered barn that sheltered her remaining livestock. Behind the main structures, a root cellar dug deep into the hillside stored what remained of their preserved food supplies, while a smokehouse stood empty, waiting for better times when meat might again be plentiful enough to preserve for winter. The well, hand-dug by Thomas, during their first summer, had seemed like a blessing then, producing sweet water that had attracted them to this particular claim. Now it barely yielded enough for basic survival, requiring careful rationing that left Sarah constantly thirsty and her animals visibly suffering. The economic situation throughout the territory had deteriorated along with the weather. Crop failures meant that even families with savings found themselves struggling to purchase basic necessities at inflated prices. The railroad, which had promised prosperity and connection to eastern markets, brought mostly disappointment as freight costs consumed whatever profits farmers might have earned from their meager harvests. Sarah's own financial resources had dwindled to almost nothing. The small inheritance from Thomas's family back in Ohio had been spent on equipment and supplies during their first optimistic years. The sale of their cattle the previous autumn had provided temporary relief, but those funds were nearly exhausted. Without rain soon, she would face the choice between abandoning the claim that represented everything they had worked for, or staying to face starvation alongside the land itself. The isolation weighed heavily on her spirit, as well as her circumstances. Thomas had been her anchor in this vast landscape, his easy laughter and unwavering optimism making even the hardest days bearable. His death had left not only practical challenges, but an emotional void that the prairie's endless silence seemed to amplify rather than soothe. Letters from her sister in Philadelphia arrived sporadically, always urging her to abandon this foolish frontier experiment and return to civilization where a woman of her education and breeding belonged. Yet something deep within Sarah rebelled against surrender, Perhaps it was stubbornness inherited from her Scottish grandfather, or maybe the knowledge that Thomas had believed so completely in their dream of building something meaningful from nothing. Whatever the source, she found herself clinging to the land with fierce determination, even as rational voices whispered that retreat might be the wisest course. The Native American tribes that had once moved freely through the region now existed, under increasing pressure from federal authorities determined to confine them to designated reservations. The Kiowa, in particular, had been forced to accept confinement at Fort Sill in Indian Territory, though some bands continued ranging across their traditional hunting grounds in defiance of government edicts. Recent military campaigns had made such freedom increasingly dangerous as army patrols pursued any tribal members found outside reservation boundaries. Sarah's knowledge of tribal affairs came primarily through second-hand accounts from travelers and newspaper reports that often emphasized sensational conflicts rather than providing nuanced understanding of complex political situations. Her own encounters with Native Americans had been limited to brief, cautious interactions during trading expeditions to Dodge City, where tribal members sometimes appeared to exchange buffalo hides and other goods for manufactured items. The broader context of her situation included the ongoing struggle between different visions of what the American West should become. Railroad companies, cattle ranchers, farming settlers, military authorities, and various tribal groups all competed for control of resources and territory, creating tensions that affected every aspect of frontier life. Sarah found herself caught between these competing forces, trying to maintain her small claim, while larger economic and political currents swirled around her. The heat that July had been unlike anything in her experience. Temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees, while the absence of any significant rainfall had turned the once green prairie into a brown wasteland where even native grasses struggled to survive. The few trees along the creek bed had shed their leaves early, standing like skeletal reminders of better times. Dust devils danced across the barren fields, while the western horizon shimmered with heat mirages that created the illusion of water, where none existed. Her animals suffered visibly under these conditions. The 2 milk cows that had once provided dairy products for trade now gave barely enough milk for her own needs. The chickens had stopped laying regularly, spending their days panting in whatever shade they could find. Even her horse, a sturdy mare named Belle that had been Thomas's pride, showed signs of the stress that affected all living things in the territory. Water conservation had become an obsession that governed every aspect of daily life. Sarah collected every drop from the reluctant well, using it first for drinking, then for cooking, and finally for the most essential cleaning tasks before giving the remainder to her animals. Bathing had become a luxury reserved for Saturday evenings, when she would heat a small amount of water and wash with the efficiency of someone who understood that waste meant potential death. Food stores were equally critical. The garden's failure meant relying entirely on preserved goods purchased during better times or acquired through careful trade with traveling merchants. Beans, cornmeal, and salt pork formed the foundation of meals that provided sustenance without variety or pleasure. The root cellar held perhaps 2 months' worth of supplies, assuming careful rationing and no unexpected emergencies. The psychological toll of constant scarcity affected Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sleep came fitfully, in the stifling heat, while dreams often featured the abundance they had enjoyed during their first hopeful years. Thomas's presence haunted quiet moments, his voice seeming to echo in the wind that moved through the empty spaces where his laughter had once filled their modest home. Yet Sarah had developed coping strategies that helped maintain her sanity. Along with her physical survival, she read and reread the few books they had brought from Ohio, finding comfort in familiar stories that transported her imagination beyond current circumstances. A diary, begun shortly after Thomas's death, provided an outlet for thoughts and feelings that had no other audience in her isolated existence. Letters, when she could afford postage, connected her to the outside world and reminded her that life continued beyond the boundaries of her drought-stricken claim. Her sister's correspondence, while often critical of her choices, nonetheless provided news of family and friends that helped maintain her sense of belonging to a larger human community. The practical skills she had acquired through necessity would have amazed her former self, the sheltered young woman who had married Thomas with romantic notions about frontier adventure. She could now repair harness leather, doctor sick animals, preserve food, and manage the complex calculations required for successful farming. These capabilities provided confidence that partially offset the loneliness and uncertainty that characterized her daily existence. Most importantly, Sarah had discovered reserves of inner strength that she hadn't known she possessed. Each crisis overcome, each difficult decision made independently, each small success achieved through her own efforts contributed to a growing sense of self-reliance that transformed what others might see as hardship into a form of hard-won independence. Her relationship with the land itself had evolved from romantic appreciation to practical understanding based on daily interaction with its moods and challenges. She could read weather signs with accuracy that rivaled long-time residents, predict seasonal changes from subtle indicators, and identify the plants and animals that shared her environment. This knowledge, acquired through observation and necessity rather than formal education, connected her to the prairie in ways that transcended mere ownership of legal documents. The morning when everything changed began like countless others before it. Sarah rose in the pre-dawn darkness, grateful for the few degrees of coolness that night provided. She dressed quickly in the practical clothing that had replaced the feminine attire of her earlier life, moved through her abbreviated morning routine, and stepped outside to face another day of managing scarcity while hoping for the rain that refused to come. The air hung still and heavy with the promise of another scorching day. No breeze stirred the dust or provided even momentary relief from the oppressive heat that would soon make outdoor work impossible. The eastern horizon showed the first pale hints of sunrise that would bring temperatures climbing toward levels that tested human endurance. Sarah's first task involved checking the well, a daily ritual that had become increasingly discouraging. As water levels continued dropping, the pump required more effort each day to produce smaller amounts of increasingly murky liquid that nonetheless represented the difference between survival and catastrophe. She filled her water buckets with careful attention to every drop, knowing that waste was a luxury she couldn't afford. The chickens emerged from their coop with obvious reluctance, seeking shade immediately rather than foraging for food in ground. Too hard and barren to support the insects they preferred. Their distress mirrored her own as she scattered the small amount of grain she could spare, watching them compete listlessly for sustenance that barely sustained life. Belle, her horse, stood motionless in the corral's only shaded corner, her coat dull and her ribs showing despite Sarah's efforts to provide adequate feed. The mare's condition worried Sarah constantly, as Belle represented not only companionship, but also her primary means of transportation to Cedar Ridge for supplies and communication with the outside world. It was while carrying water to Belle that Sarah first noticed the small footprints in the dust near the barn's back corner. The marks were clearly human, but far too small to have been made by any adult. The size suggested a child, though what child would be wandering alone in such desolate country seemed impossible to imagine. The prints appeared fresh, made sometime during the night when the dust would have been slightly damp with what little dew the drought permitted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah studied the tracks with growing puzzlement and concern. They showed bare feet, unusual for any white child in such harsh conditions, and followed a path that suggested careful approach rather than casual wandering. The person who made them had clearly been trying to avoid detection, moving close to the barn's wall where shadows would provide concealment. Following the trail, Sarah discovered that the footprints led to the small space between the barn and the hillside where she stored unused farming equipment. The area provided some protection from both sun and wind, creating a natural shelter that someone seeking concealment might choose. Disturbed dust and flattened grass indicated that someone had indeed spent time there, possibly several hours based on the extent of the disturbance. More troubling were signs that whoever had been there was in desperate condition. Scattered fragments of bark and dried grass suggested someone had been attempting to find anything edible, while marks in the dirt indicated digging with bare hands, possibly searching for roots or other food sources. The evidence painted a picture of someone driven by hunger to desperate measures. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. No white families lived within walking distance, and traveling parties always followed established roads rather than approaching homesteads through the backcountry. The military rarely moved through their area except on major campaigns, and those involved large groups rather than solitary individuals. The most likely explanation, though it carried implications she preferred not to contemplate, was that the visitor had been a Native American, possibly separated from his group and facing starvation. The realization created a complex mixture of emotions. Compassion demanded that she help anyone in such obvious distress, regardless of their background or circumstances. Yet, practical considerations whispered warnings about the dangers of involving herself in situations she didn't fully understand. Federal authorities took a dim view of unauthorized contact between settlers and tribal members, while some neighbors might interpret such assistance as disloyalty to white interests. More immediately troubling was the question of where the person might be now. The track seemed to end at the shelter site, with no clear indication of departure direction. If someone was still hiding nearby, watching her activities, the situation required careful handling that balanced caution with humanitarian concern. Sarah's decision, when it came, reflected values that had guided her through every crisis since Thomas's death. Regardless of potential complications, she couldn't ignore evidence of human suffering when she possessed the means to provide help. The amount of food required to sustain one desperate child wouldn't significantly impact her own survival prospects, while the moral cost of callous indifference would poison her conscience forever. Moving with deliberate casualness to avoid alarming anyone who might be watching, Sarah returned to her cabin and prepared a simple meal of cornbread, beans, and water. The portions were generous by her current rationing standards, but modest enough not to create suspicion if observed by neighbors or passing travelers. She wrapped the food carefully in clean cloth, added a small jug of precious water, and carried the bundle to the barn as though conducting routine chores. At the shelter site behind the barn, Sarah placed the food package in a position where it would be easily visible to anyone returning to the location. She added no note or verbal message, understanding that such communications might create more problems than they solved. The gesture would speak for itself to anyone desperate enough to appreciate its significance. The rest of that day passed with unusual tension as Sarah found herself constantly aware of the area behind the barn. Her normal routine felt artificial and strained, performed for an audience she couldn't see but suspected was watching. Every small sound caused her to pause and listen, wondering if her mysterious visitor had returned to discover her offering. By evening, when she conducted her final check of the animals, the food package had disappeared. No new footprints were visible in the hard-packed earth, but the clean removal of every crumb suggested someone had indeed accepted her help with the gratitude of genuine hunger. The empty cloth lay folded neatly beside the water jug, a small gesture of courtesy that confirmed her visitor possessed manners despite desperate circumstances. That night, Sarah lay awake longer than usual, listening to sounds that might indicate the presence of someone seeking shelter near her buildings. The knowledge that she was no longer completely alone in the vast prairie landscape brought both comfort and anxiety. Someone trusted her enough to accept help, but someone was also watching her activities with unknown intentions. The second morning brought fresh evidence of nocturnal visitation. New footprints appeared near the barn, along with signs that someone had carefully explored the area around her buildings without approaching the cabin itself. The pattern suggested reconnaissance rather than threat, as though her visitor was assessing the situation before making further contact. Sarah repeated her food offering, this time adding a few strips of precious jerky along with the usual cornbread and beans. The gesture represented significant sacrifice given her own limited resources, but something about the careful courtesy shown by her visitor inspired generosity rather than mere duty. Again, the food disappeared completely, with the same neat arrangement of empty containers that spoke of gratitude and respect. This time, however, something had been left in return. 3 perfectly shaped arrowheads, crafted from local flint with skill that spoke of considerable expertise, lay arranged beside the folded cloth. The gift carried obvious symbolic meaning while demonstrating capabilities that commanded respect. Pattern continued for 2 more days, with Sarah providing food and her mysterious visitor accepting with obvious gratitude while maintaining careful distance. Each exchange included some small token of appreciation: carved bone beads, a beautifully crafted whistle, medicinal herbs that she recognized as valuable for treating various ailments. The gifts revealed both artistic ability and extensive knowledge of traditional crafts. By the 4th day, Sarah had begun to feel genuine connection with her invisible beneficiary. The careful courtesy, obvious gratitude, and thoughtful reciprocation suggested someone raised with strong values despite current desperate circumstances. Her initial wariness had gradually given way to protective concern for whoever was surviving on her charity while maintaining such dignified behavior. The drought showed no signs of breaking, while her own situation continued deteriorating along with everyone else's in the territory. Yet the knowledge that her actions had preserved someone's life provided satisfaction that partially offset other anxieties. Whatever complications might eventually arise from her choice to help, she felt certain that Thomas would have approved of her compassion towards someone in need. Little did Sarah know that her simple acts of kindness had set in motion events that would transform not only her own life, but the destiny of an entire family, whose honor codes demanded responses that transcended anything she could have imagined possible. The 5th dawn brought something Sarah had never expected to see on her remote homestead. As she stepped outside to begin her morning routine, movement in the distance caught her eye. A lone figure approached across the prairie, moving with the steady gait of someone who had traveled far but was not yet exhausted. Even from a distance, she could tell this was no ordinary traveler. The person walked directly toward her property with a purpose that suggested familiarity with the location. As the figure drew closer, Sarah realized she was looking at a young Native American boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, walking openly across the open ground without any attempt at concealment. His appearance was startling after days of mysterious nighttime visits and careful hiding. The boy was clearly Kiowa, based on the distinctive beadwork and clothing styles Sarah had observed during her infrequent trips to trading posts. His traditional garments, while showing signs of hard travel and privation, were well made and spoke of a family with resources and status. Most remarkably, he carried himself with dignity that seemed remarkable for someone who had obviously been surviving on her charitable offerings. When he reached the edge of her property, the boy stopped and waited. His posture was respectful, but not servile, suggesting someone accustomed to courtesy but not submission. He made no attempt to approach her buildings, instead standing in clear view while obviously waiting for her to acknowledge his presence and indicate whether he was welcome. Sarah approached slowly, uncertain about proper protocols for such encounters. Her experience with Native Americans was limited to brief, formal interactions during trading expeditions, and those had always been mediated by experienced traders who understood cultural nuances. Now she found herself facing a direct encounter that required her to navigate unfamiliar social territories without guidance. "Good morning," she said simply, stopping several yards away to maintain a comfortable distance for both of them. The boy's response surprised her with its clarity and sophistication. "Good morning, ma'am. I am Joseph Crow Feather of the Kiowa Nation. You have been very kind to me during my time of need. I come now to thank you properly and to explain my circumstances." His English was excellent, with only a slight accent that suggested extensive education rather than casual acquisition of the language. The formality of his introduction and the care with which he chose his words indicated someone raised with strong emphasis on proper behavior and respect for social conventions. "I am Sarah Mitchell," she replied, matching his formal tone while studying his face for clues about his intentions and condition. "You're welcome to sit in the shade while we talk. The day is already getting hot." Joseph's relief at her invitation was visible, though he maintained his dignified bearing as he moved toward the porch. His movements revealed the careful economy of someone who had been conserving energy, while his obvious gratitude for the offer of shade spoke to the physical toll his recent ordeal had taken. As they settled on the porch, Sarah had her first clear opportunity to assess the boy's condition. He was thin, but not emaciated, suggesting that her food offerings had been sufficient to prevent serious malnutrition. His eyes were alert and intelligent, while his manner conveyed both natural confidence and genuine appreciation for her assistance. "I must ask your forgiveness for taking your food without permission," Joseph began. "My circumstances were desperate, and I was afraid that approaching directly might frighten you or create problems you didn't deserve." "You don't need to apologize for being hungry," Sarah replied gently. "I'm glad I could help, but I'm curious about how you came to be alone out here. This isn't exactly a well-traveled area." The story that emerged over the next hour revealed circumstances that were both more complex and more dangerous than Sarah had imagined. Joseph was indeed Kiowa, son of a respected warrior named Grey Eagle, who served as one of the principal advisors to the band's war chief. His family had been living on the reservation at Fort Sill, but conditions there had become increasingly difficult as promised supplies failed to arrive and government officials proved either incompetent or corrupt. "My father and uncles decided to leave the reservation temporarily to hunt buffalo," Joseph explained. "The meat was needed for our people, especially the children and elderly who were suffering from poor rations. The hunting party was small, only 8 men, and they planned to return quickly to avoid trouble with the soldiers. The hunting expedition had been successful initially, locating a small herd of buffalo in the remote areas where the animals still roamed freely. However, their return journey had been interrupted by a cavalry patrol that had orders to arrest any Native Americans found outside reservation boundaries. The encounter had resulted in a running battle that scattered the hunting party and left Joseph separated from his family in unfamiliar territory. "I was helping my uncle Steel Arrow with the pack horses when the soldiers appeared," Joseph continued, his voice carrying the weight of traumatic memory. "He told me to take one horse and ride hard toward the north, away from the fighting. I was supposed to find my way back to our people and tell them what had happened. But the boy's escape had not gone according to plan. The horse had stepped in a prairie dog hole and broken its leg, forcing Joseph to continue on foot across territory he didn't know well. His supplies had been limited, consisting only of what he could carry in a small pack, and those had been exhausted after several days of walking. I was following the creek beds, hoping to find water and maybe some game, he explained. But everything was so dry, and I had no luck hunting with just a bow and a few arrows. By the time I found your place, I hadn't eaten in 2 days and was starting to feel weak. The revelation of his identity and circumstances created new complications. For Sarah, Joseph was not just any hungry child, but the son of a prominent Kiowa warrior whose family would certainly be searching for him. More troubling was the knowledge that he had been separated during a military engagement, which meant that federal authorities might also be looking for him as a potential hostile or witness to illegal activities. "Do you know what happened to your father and the others?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer while knowing she needed to understand the full situation. "I don't know," Joseph admitted, his composure finally showing cracks as he confronted the uncertainty that had been haunting him. "The gunfire lasted for a long time, but I was riding away as fast as I could. My uncle told me not to look back, to just keep going until I was safe." The anguish in his voice revealed the psychological toll of not knowing whether his family had survived the encounter. For a boy his age, the combination of physical hardship and emotional trauma would have been overwhelming. Yet he had managed to maintain his dignity and courtesy, even under the most difficult circumstances. Sarah found herself facing a decision that would have profound implications, regardless of what she chose. Keeping Joseph hidden might be safest for him in the short term, but it would also make her complicit in harboring someone the military might consider a fugitive. Turning him over to authorities might protect her from legal consequences, but could result in his imprisonment or worse treatment at the hands of officials who viewed all Native Americans with suspicion. "What do you want to do?" she asked, deciding to let his own judgment guide her response. "Do you want to try to get back to your people, or would you prefer to stay here until we can figure out what happened to your family?" Joseph's answer revealed the depth of thought he'd given to his situation during the long days of hiding and uncertainty. "I think my Uncle Steel Arrow will come looking for me if he survived the fight with the soldiers. He is my mother's brother, and he has always taken special responsibility for my safety and education. But I don't know how long it might take him to track me here, or if he will be able to come at all." The boy's faith in his uncle's devotion was touching, but Sarah wondered whether such optimism was realistic given the dangerous circumstances surrounding their separation. Military patrols were actively searching for members of the scattered hunting party, and any attempt to rescue Joseph would require considerable risk and careful planning. "If your uncle does come looking for you, how would he find this place?" Sarah asked, trying to understand the practical aspects of potential rescue attempts. "Steel Arrow is one of the best trackers among our people," Joseph replied with obvious pride. "He taught me to read signs and follow trails, though I'm not nearly as skilled as he is. If he survived the fight, he will be able to follow my path, especially since I stayed near water sources and made mistakes that would leave clear traces for someone who knows what to look for." This revelation added another layer of complexity to Sarah's situation. If Joseph's uncle was indeed skilled enough to track him across the prairie, then her homestead might soon receive a visit from a Kiowa warrior whose intentions could be either grateful or hostile, depending on his interpretation of the circumstances. "What kind of man is your uncle?" Sarah asked, hoping to better understand what she might be facing. Joseph's face brightened as he spoke about Steel Arrow, revealing the deep affection and respect he felt for his mother's brother. "He is a great warrior, but also very wise and Fair. He has been to the white man's schools and can speak English well. My father says he understands both worlds, the old ways and the new ways, and that this makes him valuable to our people. The description was encouraging, suggesting that Steel Arrow might be someone capable of reasonable discussion if he did appear at her homestead. However, Sarah remained aware that even reasonable men could become dangerous when their family members were threatened or when they felt their honor had been challenged. He has never married, Joseph continued, because he says he has responsibilities to our family that come before his own desires. He helped raise me after my mother died, and he has always been like a second father to me. This information helped Sarah understand the strength of the bond that would motivate Steel Arrow to search for his nephew despite obvious dangers. The boy's confidence in his uncle's devotion was clearly based on years of experience with someone who had demonstrated unwavering loyalty to family obligations. As the morning progressed and the heat began building toward its usual oppressive intensity, Sarah made practical decisions about Joseph's immediate welfare. Despite the potential complications, she couldn't bring herself to turn away a child who had already suffered so much. Her offer to provide shelter, food, and protection until his family situation could be resolved reflected both humanitarian instincts and growing personal attachment to the brave, courteous boy. Joseph's acceptance of her assistance was gracious, but also revealed his own understanding of the risks she was taking on his behalf. "You are very kind, Mrs. Mitchell, but I don't want to bring trouble to your home. If soldiers come looking for me, they might think you are helping enemies of the government." His concern for her welfare, despite his own precarious situation, impressed Sarah and reinforced her decision to help him regardless of potential consequences. "Let me worry about that," she said firmly. "Right now you need rest, food, and a safe place to recover your strength. We can figure out other problems as they arise." The arrangement they worked out balanced Joseph's need for security with Sarah's requirement to maintain normal routines that wouldn't attract unwanted attention. He would sleep in the barn's loft, which provided both concealment and quick escape routes if necessary. During daylight hours, he would stay near the buildings but out of sight from the main road, helping with chores that could be performed without creating suspicious activity. Joseph's assistance proved invaluable in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. His knowledge of drought survival techniques, learned through tribal experience with harsh conditions, helped her improve her water conservation methods and identify edible plants she had overlooked. His hunting skills, while limited by the scarcity of game, nonetheless provided occasional additions to their meager food supplies. More importantly, his presence ended the crushing isolation that had been weighing on Sarah's spirit. Having someone to talk with, even about simple daily matters, restored a sense of human connection that she hadn't realized how much she missed. Joseph's intelligence and curiosity made him an engaging companion, while his courteous manner and obvious gratitude created a household atmosphere that was surprisingly comfortable despite its unusual circumstances. The boy's stories about Kiowa life provided Sarah with insights into Native American culture that challenged many of the stereotypes she'd absorbed from newspaper accounts and popular literature. His descriptions of tribal governance, family relationships, and spiritual beliefs revealed sophisticated social systems that bore little resemblance to the primitive savagery that white society generally assumed characterized all indigenous peoples. "My people have laws and customs that are just as complex as those of white society," Joseph explained during one of their evening conversations. "We have different ways of organizing ourselves, but that doesn't mean we are less civilized or intelligent." These discussions opened Sarah's mind to perspectives she had never seriously considered, while Joseph's obvious education and refinement provided living proof that Native Americans were capable of achievements that mainstream society rarely acknowledged or respected. The third day of Joseph's open presence at the homestead brought the first sign that their situation might be about to change dramatically. Belle, Sarah's horse, became restless during the afternoon. Ears pricked and head raised, as though detecting something beyond human perception. Her behavior continued into the evening, suggesting that something or someone was moving in the distance. Joseph noticed the mare's alertness immediately and interpreted it with knowledge gained through years of frontier life. "Something is coming," he said quietly. "Belle senses horses or people moving toward us, probably still far away but getting closer." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she considered the implications. The approach could be innocent travelers, military patrols, neighbors, or Joseph's family members conducting rescue operations. Each possibility carried different risks and required different responses. "Could it be your uncle?" she asked, hoping for the best, while preparing mentally for various alternatives. "Maybe," Joseph replied, his voice carrying both hope and apprehension. "Steel Arrow would approach carefully, especially if he wasn't sure of my safety or your intentions. He would want to observe the situation before making contact." That night, both Sarah and Joseph slept fitfully, alert for sounds that might indicate visitors approaching under cover of darkness. The knowledge that their peaceful interlude was probably ending created tension that affected every aspect of their evening routine. Dawn brought clear evidence that change was indeed coming. Fresh horse tracks appeared near the creek, indicating that riders had approached during the night to within a few hundred yards of the homestead. The tracks showed multiple horses, suggesting a group rather than a single traveler, and their pattern indicated careful reconnaissance rather than casual passage. Joseph studied the tracks with excitement and apprehension. "These are unshod horses," he observed, "and the way they moved shows riders who know how to approach without being detected. This could be my people." The possibility that rescue was at hand filled Joseph with joy, but Sarah found herself experiencing mixed emotions. While she wanted the boy reunited with his family, she had grown fond of his company and dreaded returning to the isolation that had characterized her life before his arrival. More practically, she worried about how Joseph's family would interpret her role in recent events. Would they see her as a good Samaritan who had saved their child, or as a white woman whose motives for helping might be suspect? The answer to that question would determine whether the approaching encounter would bring gratitude or hostility. The morning passed with increasing tension as both Sarah and Joseph waited for whatever contact might come. The heat built toward its usual oppressive intensity, but neither could concentrate on normal activities while knowing that their situation was about to be resolved one way or another. It was mid-afternoon when the first figure became visible, in the distance, appearing as a heat shimmer that gradually resolved into a mounted warrior, approaching at a steady but unhurried pace. Joseph's excitement was immediate and obvious as he recognized the distinctive riding style and equipment of his people. "That's Steel Arrow," he said with absolute certainty, his voice carrying relief and joy that had been building for days. "He found me, just as I knew he would." Sarah's first glimpse of Steel Arrow, even from a distance, conveyed an impression of capability and authority that commanded respect. He rode with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the saddle, while his approach demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested military experience. Most notably, he came alone, despite the tracks indicating a larger group, showing either confidence in his ability to handle whatever situation he might find or respect for the peaceful nature of his mission. As Steel Arrow drew closer, Sarah could see that he was indeed an impressive figure. Tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, he possessed the bearing of natural leadership, while his equipment and clothing indicated someone of status within his community. His face, when it became visible, was marked by intelligence and determination, but also by lines of worry that spoke to the stress of recent events. The moment of contact, when it came, would determine the future course of events for everyone involved. Joseph's reunion with his uncle would end one phase of the crisis, but it would also begin another as Sarah faced the unknown reactions of a Kiowa warrior whose nephew she had sheltered during desperate circumstances. Neither Sarah nor Joseph could have imagined the extraordinary developments that Steel Arrow's arrival would bring, or the way that their simple act of compassion would lead to consequences that would transform all their lives in ways that defied every expectation about how such encounters typically resolved themselves on the frontier. Steel Arrow dismounted, 50 yards from Sarah's cabin, with fluid grace that spoke of decades spent in the saddle. His horse, a magnificent paint stallion with distinctive black and white markings, stood perfectly still without being tied, demonstrating the kind of training that reflected both skill and patience. The warrior himself presented a figure that commanded immediate respect through bearing alone, without any need for aggressive display or intimidating gestures. He wore traditional Kiowa clothing that had been crafted with obvious care and expense. His shirt, made from the finest buckskin, bore intricate beadwork in patterns that Sarah had learned from Joseph, carried specific meaning about clan affiliation and personal achievements. A ceremonial tomahawk hung at his side, its handle wrapped in leather and decorated with eagle feathers that indicated honors earned in battle or leadership roles. Most striking was Steel Arrow's face, which combined intelligence with the kind of weathered strength that came from years of facing challenges that tested both physical and mental capabilities. His eyes, dark and penetrating, missed nothing as they surveyed the homestead's layout, noting defensible positions, escape routes, and any potential threats. Yet despite this tactical awareness, his expression remained calm and non-threatening. Joseph ran toward his uncle with the uninhibited joy of a child reunited with beloved family. The warrior's stern features softened immediately as he embraced his nephew, speaking rapidly in Kiowa while examining the boy for signs of injury or maltreatment. Their conversation, conducted in their native language, was clearly emotional, as Joseph recounted his experiences, and Steel Arrow expressed relief at finding him safe. Sarah remained on her porch, uncertain whether to approach or wait to be acknowledged. Her knowledge of Plains Indian customs was limited, and she had no desire to inadvertently commit some breach of protocol that might be interpreted as disrespectful or hostile. The reunion between uncle and nephew was clearly a private moment that deserved respectful distance. After several minutes of intense conversation, Steel Arrow turned his attention towards Sarah. His approach was formal and deliberate, each step calculated to convey respect rather than threat. When he reached speaking distance, he removed his hat in a gesture that bridged cultural differences through universally understood courtesy. "Ma'am," he said, his English clear and only slightly accented, "I am Steel Arrow of the Kiowa Nation, brother to Joseph's mother who walks with the spirits. I have come to bring my nephew home to his people." His voice carried natural authority that demanded attention, but also genuine warmth that suggested positive intentions. The formal introduction and courteous manner aligned with Joseph's descriptions of his uncle as someone who understood both worlds and could navigate successfully between them. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she replied, matching his formal tone while studying his face for clues about his assessment of the situation. "Joseph has been welcome here. He's a fine young man who has been very helpful during his stay." Steel Arrow's expression revealed surprise at this information. Whatever he had expected to find at the homestead, it apparently hadn't included reports of his nephew providing assistance rather than merely receiving charity. His eyes moved between Sarah and Joseph, clearly seeking to understand the nature of their relationship and the circumstances that had brought them together. "My nephew tells me you fed him when he was starving," Steel Arrow said, his tone carrying significance that went beyond simple gratitude. "He says you asked for nothing in return, and that you treated him with kindness and respect despite his desperate condition." The warrior's careful choice of words suggested that he understood the cultural implications of Sarah's actions better than she did herself. Among Plains tribes, hospitality to strangers was considered a sacred obligation, but extending such generosity across racial lines during times of conflict required courage that deserved special recognition. "Anyone would have done the same," Sarah replied, though she knew this wasn't necessarily true. Many settlers would have turned away a Native American child regardless of his condition, either from fear or prejudice. "No," Steel Arrow said firmly, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Many would not. Many would have seen only his race and not his need. You saw a hungry child and fed him. This is the action of someone with honor." The formal way he pronounced the word honor carried weight that suggested specific meaning within Kiowa culture. Sarah sensed that she was being evaluated according to standards she didn't fully understand, and that Steel Arrow's assessment would have consequences beyond the immediate reunion. Joseph, meanwhile, had been speaking quietly with his uncle in Kiowa, clearly providing additional details about his experiences at the homestead. Steel Arrow listened intently, occasionally asking questions that prompted longer explanations from the boy. Their conversation continued for several minutes while Sarah waited uncertainly nearby. When they finished talking, Steel Arrow's demeanor had shifted noticeably. The cautious formality of initial contact had been replaced by something warmer and more personal, as though Joseph's account had resolved questions about Sarah's character and motivations that the warrior needed answered before proceeding further. "My nephew speaks of your kindness in ways that touch my heart," Steel Arrow said, his English becoming more natural and less formally structured. "He tells me you not only fed his body but also his spirit, treating him as a guest rather than a burden during days when you could spare little for yourself." The observation revealed that Joseph had provided detailed accounts of their interactions, including Sarah's own difficult circumstances. The boy had clearly been observant about her struggles with the drought and economic hardship, information that would help his uncle understand the full significance of her generosity. "Joseph has been in good company," Sarah replied honestly. "I've enjoyed having him here. This is a lonely place, especially during hard times like these." Steel Arrow nodded thoughtfully, as though her admission confirmed something he had suspected. "Loneliness can be as dangerous as hunger," he observed. "My nephew's presence has been a gift to you as well as your care being a gift to him." This recognition of mutual benefit impressed Sarah, as it suggested understanding that transcended simple concepts of charity and obligation. Steel Arrow seemed to grasp that relationships could provide value to all participants, rather than creating one-sided debts that required repayment. "I must ask about my brother Grey Eagle and the others who were with us," Steel Arrow continued, his expression becoming more serious. "Joseph was separated during trouble with soldiers. Have you heard anything about what happened to the rest of our hunting party?" Sarah's heart sank as she realized she had no information to offer about Joseph's father and the other warriors. "I'm sorry, but I haven't heard anything. We're quite isolated here, and news doesn't travel quickly to this area." Steel Arrow's disappointment was visible, though he maintained his composure. "I had hoped you might have learned something from travelers or neighbors. The uncertainty has been difficult for all our families." "What do you know about what happened?" Sarah asked, hoping to better understand the situation that had led to Joseph's separation from his family. The story that emerged was more complex and troubling than Joseph's earlier account had revealed. The hunting party had indeed been successful. in locating buffalo, but their return journey had been complicated by increasing military patrols that were under orders to arrest any Native Americans found outside reservation boundaries. The new colonel at Fort Sill has decided that all hunting parties are illegal, even though the treaty allows us to hunt on unoccupied lands, Steel Arrow explained. He has sent cavalry patrols throughout the region with orders to bring back any tribal members they find. The encounter that had scattered the hunting party had occurred near the Arkansas River, where the warriors had been processing their kill and preparing for the return journey. A cavalry patrol had appeared without, warning, demanding immediate surrender despite the hunting party's legal right to be in the area. Gray Eagle tried to explain that we were hunting legally under treaty provisions, Steel Arrow continued, his voice carrying anger that he kept carefully controlled. But the patrol leader was young and excited, wanting to make a reputation. By capturing dangerous Indians, the fighting had erupted when one of the soldiers had attempted to seize horses belonging to the hunting party, treating the animals as contraband rather than legitimate property. In the confusion that followed, the warriors had scattered in different directions, with each man responsible for reaching safety independently. "I was able to escape with 2 others, Steel Arrow said. "But we don't know what happened to Gray, Eagle, and the remaining warriors. They may have been captured, or they may be hiding somewhere waiting for the pursuit to end." The uncertainty about Joseph's father's fate clearly weighed heavily on both the boy and his uncle. Steel Arrow's mission to find his nephew had been successful, but the larger family crisis remained unresolved, with potentially tragic implications. "How did you find Joseph here?" Sarah asked, curious about the tracking skills that had led the warrior to her remote homestead. Steel Arrow's face showed the first genuine smile she had seen since his arrival. "My nephew left a trail that spoke clearly to someone who knows how to read such signs. He stayed near water sources as he was taught, and his path showed the marks of someone moving purposefully rather than wandering randomly." The explanation revealed the effectiveness of traditional education methods that prepared young tribal members for survival in harsh environments. Joseph's ability to navigate unfamiliar territory while injured and hungry demonstrated skills that few white children would have possessed. "But more than tracking brought me here," Steel Arrow continued, his expression becoming more serious. "I dreamed of a woman with kind eyes who would help my nephew when he needed it most. When I found his trail leading toward this place, I knew the dream had shown me truth." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the suggestion that supernatural guidance had played a role in recent events, but the sincerity in Steel Arrow's voice prevented her from dismissing his statement as mere superstition. Among Plains tribes, dreams and visions carried significant meaning that influenced important decisions. "Whether dreams or skill led you here," she said diplomatically, "what matters is that you found Joseph safe and well." "Yes," Steel Arrow agreed. "But now I must consider how to properly acknowledge the debt my family owes you for preserving his life." The word debt created immediate unease for Sarah, who had no desire to become entangled in obligations she didn't understand. Her assistance to Joseph had been freely given without expectation of reward or repayment. "There's no debt," she said firmly. "I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return." Steel Arrow's response revealed cultural differences about honor and obligation that couldn't be dismissed through simple denial. "Among my people, when someone saves a life, especially the life of a child, obligations are created that must be acknowledged properly. To ignore such debts would dishonor both the giver and receiver." The intensity of his conviction made clear that this was not a matter open to negotiation. Within Kiowa culture, certain actions created responsibilities that transcended personal preferences about acknowledgement or repayment. I understand that you acted from goodness of heart, Steel Arrow continued, but this makes the obligation greater, not smaller. Pure generosity deserves the highest forms of recognition. Sarah began to feel trapped by cultural expectations she had never intended to invoke. Her simple act of feeding a hungry child had apparently created complications that could affect her relationship with the Kiowa nation in ways she couldn't predict or control. "What kind of acknowledgement are you talking about?" she asked, dreading the answer while knowing she needed to understand what Steel Arrow had in mind. The warrior's response revealed the depth of thought he had given to this question during his journey to find Joseph. "First, I must determine the full extent of what you have sacrificed to help my nephew. Only then can I offer appropriate recognition of your generosity." His systematic approach to evaluating her assistance suggested that whatever acknowledgement he planned would be carefully calculated based on specific assessment of costs and benefits. The business-like nature of his thinking was both reassuring and alarming. "Joseph has told me about your difficult circumstances," Steel Arrow continued. "The drought has been hard on everyone, but especially on those who farm the land. Your willingness to share food when you had little for yourself shows courage as well as kindness." The observation that he understood her own struggles created mixed feelings. Sarah appreciated his recognition of the sacrifice involved in her generosity, but also felt exposed by having her desperate situation so clearly perceived by someone she barely knew. "I also know that helping my nephew carried risks for you," Steel Arrow added. "If soldiers had found him here, they might have assumed you were assisting hostile Indians. Your safety could have been threatened by your kindness." This acknowledgement of political dangers impressed Sarah, as it showed that Steel Arrow understood the complex environment in which her decision had been made. His awareness of risks she had faced suggested sophisticated understanding of frontier politics and racial tensions. These factors must all be considered when determining proper recognition, Steel Arrow concluded. "My people have ways of honoring such debts that ensure everyone understands the respect we hold for those who show true courage." The formal nature of his language suggested that whatever acknowledgement he planned would follow established customs, rather than being improvised for their specific situation. Sarah found herself wondering what those customs might involve, and whether she would have any choice about accepting whatever he decided to offer. "I need to return to my people to report Joseph's safety," Steel Arrow said, shifting to more immediate, practical matters. "But I will come back within 4 days to properly acknowledge your assistance. Please be prepared to receive visitors who come with grateful hearts." The mention of visitors suggested that Steel Arrow's planned acknowledgement would involve more than just personal thanks. Sarah's apprehension increased as she realized that her homestead might soon receive a delegation of Kiowa representatives conducting some form of formal ceremony. "How many visitors should I expect?" she asked, hoping for information that would help her prepare for whatever was coming. Steel Arrow's smile suggested that her question had reminded him of something particularly significant, enough to demonstrate the importance my people place on honoring those who show true nobility of spirit. The cryptic answer provided no practical guidance, while increasing her uncertainty about what she had inadvertently committed herself to. By helping Joseph, the warrior's obvious pleasure at her discomfort suggested that whatever surprise he was planning would be substantial. As Steel Arrow prepared to depart with his nephew, the emotional farewell between Sarah and Joseph revealed how meaningful their brief relationship had become for both participants. The boy's gratitude was obvious, but so was genuine affection that had developed through shared experiences and mutual respect. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Mitchell," Joseph said, his young voice carrying adult seriousness. "I will never forget your kindness, and neither will my family. Take care of yourself." Sarah replied, surprised by how difficult it was to see him leave. "You're always welcome here if you ever need help again." Steel Arrow witnessed this exchange with obvious interest, clearly noting the genuine warmth between his nephew and the white woman who had cared for him. His assessment of Sarah's character was apparently being influenced by Joseph's obvious affection as well as his accounts of her behavior. "We will see you again soon, Mrs. Mitchell," Steel Arrow said as he mounted his horse. "Please prepare yourself to receive the honor you have earned through your actions." As uncle and nephew rode away across the prairie, Sarah was left to contemplate the mysterious promise of recognition that Steel Arrow had made. His formal manner and cryptic references to established customs suggested that whatever was coming would be significant beyond anything she could imagine. The next 4 days passed slowly as Sarah alternated between curiosity and apprehension about Steel Arrow's promised return. Her normal routine felt artificial and strained as she found herself constantly watching the horizon for signs of approaching visitors. The isolation that had briefly been relieved by Joseph's presence now seemed more oppressive than ever. On the 4th morning, as dawn broke clear and hot across the drought-stricken prairie, movement in the distance caught Sarah's attention. What she saw defied every expectation she had formed about Steel Arrow's return visit. A long line of riders approached across the open ground, their numbers far exceeding anything she had imagined possible. As they drew closer, Sarah could see that each rider led additional horses, creating a procession that stretched across the landscape like something from another world entirely. At the head of this impressive column rode Steel Arrow, his bearing even more formal and ceremonial than during his previous visit. Behind him came what appeared to be the leadership of his entire band, warriors and elders arranged in careful order that spoke of organized purpose rather than casual gathering. But it was the horses that took Sarah's breath away. Dozens of magnificent animals, their coats gleaming in the morning sun, moved in disciplined formation that demonstrated training and value beyond anything she had ever seen. These were not ordinary mounts, but war horses bred and trained for speed, endurance, and battle effectiveness. As the procession halted before her cabin, Sarah realized that Steel Arrow's promised acknowledgement was about to exceed every assumption she had made about what gratitude might look like when expressed through Kiowa customs. The sight before her represented wealth and honor on a scale that transformed her simple act of feeding a hungry boy into something approaching legend. Steel Arrow dismounted and approached with the same formal dignity he had shown during their first meeting, but now his manner carried additional weight that spoke of ceremonial significance. When he spoke, his voice carried across the prairie. With authority that commanded attention from every person present. "Sarah Mitchell," he announced, "you fed my nephew when he was starving, asking nothing in return. Today, my people have come to show you the honor such nobility deserves." The sight that greeted Sarah as the sun climbed higher defied every expectation she had formed about frontier life. 40 magnificent war horses stood in perfect formation before her modest homestead, each animal representing wealth that exceeded the annual income of most Kansas farmers. The horses themselves were extraordinary specimens, their coats ranging from midnight black to pure white, with paints, roans, and chestnuts that gleamed like polished metal in the morning light. Behind Steel Arrow, 12 Kiowa warriors sat mounted, on their own horses, their traditional regalia indicating men of high status within the tribal hierarchy. Eagle feathers adorned their hair, while their clothing bore the intricate beadwork and decorations that marked achievements in battle, leadership, and spiritual matters. Their presence transformed Sarah's humble property into something approaching a diplomatic venue where momentous events were about to unfold. Most imposing was the elderly man who rode at Steel Arrow's right hand. His age was evident in his weathered face and silver-streaked hair, but his bearing commanded instant respect. The elaborate nature of his clothing and the deference shown by other warriors made clear that this was someone of extraordinary importance within Kiowa society. "Sarah Mitchell," Steel Arrow announced, his voice carrying formal authority that seemed to echo across the prairie. "Allow me to present Chief Iron Bear, leader of our band, keeper of our traditions, and the man who has authorized this recognition of your noble actions." Chief Iron Bear dismounted with the careful dignity of advanced age, his movements revealing the physical toll of decades spent in leadership roles that demanded both wisdom and strength. When he approached Sarah, his dark eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen the full scope of human experience and learned to judge character with accuracy born of necessity. "Young woman," he said in heavily accented English, "my nephew Steel Arrow has told me of your kindness to our boy Joseph. He has spoken of your courage in feeding a starving child when you had little food for yourself. These are actions that honor your people and deserve recognition from mine." The chief's formal manner and careful pronunciation suggested someone who had learned English through diplomatic necessity rather than casual contact. His words carried the weight of official proclamation, indicating that what was about to occur represented tribal policy rather than merely personal gratitude. "You honor me with your presence, Chief Iron Bear," Sarah replied, unsure of proper protocol, but determined to match the dignity being shown to her. "I did what anyone with a conscience would do. Joseph needed help, and I was able to provide it." Chief Iron Bear's expression suggested that her response had been carefully evaluated and found acceptable. "You speak with humility, which shows wisdom, but you also speak with inaccuracy. Not anyone would have acted as you did. Many would have seen only the color of Joseph's skin and closed their hearts to his need." The chief's directness about racial prejudice created momentary discomfort, but Sarah recognized the truth in his observation. Her decision to help Joseph had been instinctive, but it had also required overcoming social conditioning that might have influenced others to turn away. "Among my people," Chief Iron Bear continued, "certain actions create debts that must be acknowledged according to our traditions. The preservation of a child's life, especially when that preservation requires personal sacrifice, represents the highest form of generosity. Such generosity demands recognition that demonstrates our understanding of its value." Steel Arrow stepped forward and gestured toward the magnificent horses that stood waiting behind him. "These 40 war horses represent the wealth of our band. Each animal has been chosen for its strength, speed, and training. Together, they represent prosperity that could support a family for many years." Sarah's mind reeled as she began to understand the magnitude of what was being offered. 40 trained war horses represented wealth beyond anything she had ever imagined possessing. The value of such animals, particularly in a territory where good horses were scarce and expensive, exceeded her homestead's worth many times over. "I cannot accept such valuable gifts," she protested, her practical nature rebelling against the idea of accepting charity on such a massive scale. "My assistance to Joseph was freely given. I expect no payment or reward." Chief Iron Bear's response revealed cultural differences about honor and obligation that transcended simple concepts of payment or charity. "This is not payment for services rendered. This is recognition of character revealed through actions that preserved one of our own when preservation was desperately needed." The distinction was subtle but important. The horses were being offered not as compensation for services, but as acknowledgement of Sarah's demonstrated nobility of spirit. The difference transformed the gift from commercial transaction into cultural ceremony, with significance that extended beyond immediate participants. Furthermore, Steel Arrow added. Accepting these horses would create bonds between you and our people that could benefit everyone involved. You would become known as a friend of the Kiowa, someone who could travel safely in our territory and conduct business with our protection. This practical aspect of the offer added layers of meaning that Sarah hadn't considered. In a region where conflicts between settlers and Native Americans created constant danger, having the friendship and protection of a powerful tribe could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The horses themselves are trained for war, but they are also excellent for farm work, transportation, and breeding, Steel Arrow continued, addressing practical concerns that a homesteader would naturally have. They could transform your agricultural prospects while providing security and mobility that would improve your situation in every way. One of the warriors, a man Steel Arrow introduced as Black Hawk, dismounted and approached the nearest horse. The animal was a magnificent black stallion whose coat shone like polished obsidian in the morning sunlight. Its build suggested both strength and speed, while its alert demeanor indicated intelligence and training that exceeded ordinary stock. "This is Thunder Runner," Black Hawk said in careful English. "Strongest of our war horses, fastest across long distances, and smartest in battle. He alone is worth more than most men earn in 5 years of hard work." Sarah found herself drawn to examine the stallion, despite her reservations about accepting such valuable gifts. Thunder Runner's conformation was perfect, his muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat as he moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete. His eyes showed intelligence and curiosity rather than the wildness that characterized untrained Mustangs. "He is trained to respond to voice commands and knee pressure," Black Hawk continued, demonstrating the horse's responsiveness to subtle cues. "He can run for days without tiring, carry heavy loads without complaint, and defend his rider against both animal and human threats." The demonstration revealed training that represented years of careful work by skilled horsemen. Thunder Runner responded to Black Hawk's commands with precision that spoke of deep understanding between horse and rider, while his calm demeanor around strangers suggested temperament that would make him suitable for civilian use. "The mares in this herd are equally valuable," Steel Arrow added, gesturing toward a group of horses whose quality was evident even to Sarah's untrained eye. "They are proven breeders whose offspring command high prices among both our people and white traders. Establishing a breeding program with these animals could provide income for decades." The economic implications of the offer were staggering. A successful horse breeding operation could transform Sarah's precarious financial situation into genuine prosperity, while providing economic activity that would benefit the entire region. The drought that had devastated farming might actually make horse breeding more attractive as an alternative source of income. Chief Iron Bear stepped closer to Sarah, his aged features serious as he addressed the cultural significance of what was being offered. "These horses carry the spirit of our people. They have been companions in battle, partners in the hunt, and symbols of our freedom to move across the land our ancestors knew. In giving them to you, we share something sacred." The spiritual dimension of the gift added complexity that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Accepting the horses would mean becoming custodian of animals that carried deep cultural meaning for the Kiowa people, creating responsibilities that extended beyond simple ownership. "We do not offer these gifts lightly," Chief Iron Bear continued, "nor do we expect them to be accepted lightly. They represent trust, that you will honor the spirit in which they are given, and that you will remember the friendship between our peoples that these animals symbolize." Joseph, who had remained silent during the formal proceedings, now approached Sarah with obvious excitement. "Mrs. Mitchell, these horses are the finest in all the territory. My uncle has been collecting them for years, choosing only the strongest and smartest for our war band. This gift shows the greatest respect our people can offer." The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, But Sarah remained troubled by the magnitude of what was being offered. Accepting such valuable gifts would create obligations and expectations that she might not be able to fulfill, while declining them might be interpreted as rejection of Kiowa friendship and respect. "I am deeply honored by your generosity," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure I understand what would be expected of me if I accepted such valuable animals. What responsibilities would come with such a gift?" Steel Arrow's approval of her question was evident in his expression. "You ask the right questions, which shows wisdom. The responsibilities are simple but important. You would care for the horses with the respect they deserve, use them for purposes that honor their nature, and remember that they represent friendship between our peoples." Chief Iron Bear nodded agreement. "You would also be expected to speak truthfully about how you came to possess such animals, so that others might learn of Kiowa honor and generosity. The story of these horses should inspire others to show kindness to those in need." This expectation created additional considerations for Sarah. Owning such valuable animals would inevitably attract attention from neighbors, territorial authorities, and potentially hostile parties who might view her possession of Indian horses with suspicion. Explaining their origin would require her to tell Joseph's story repeatedly, potentially creating unwanted scrutiny of her actions. "What about other white people who might not understand the circumstances?" Sarah asked. "Some might assume I obtained these horses through questionable means, or that accepting them represents some kind of disloyalty to my own people." Steel Arrow's expression grew serious as he considered the political implications of her concern. "This is a real danger that we have discussed among ourselves. There are those among your people who would see friendship with Indians as betrayal, just as there are those among our people who view cooperation with whites as weakness." Chief Iron Bear's response revealed the careful thought that had gone into their decision to make such a dramatic gesture. "We believe that demonstrating honor and generosity openly is the best way to build understanding between our peoples. Those who would criticize friendship are the same ones who would criticize any cooperation, regardless of how it might benefit everyone involved." The political courage required to make such a public gesture impressed Sarah, as it showed that the Kiowa leadership was willing to risk criticism from their own people in order to honor her actions. Their commitment to recognizing her kindness transcended simple gratitude and represented a statement about the kind of relationships they hoped to build with sympathetic whites. "There is another consideration," Steel Arrow added, his tone becoming more personal. "These horses would provide you with protection that extends beyond their monetary value. Anyone who might consider harming you would know that such actions would bring swift response from warriors who value your friendship." The security implications of the offer were significant in a region where isolated homesteaders faced constant threats from various sources. Having the protection of Kiowa warriors could mean the difference between survival and disaster for a woman living alone on the frontier. "I need time to consider this offer," Sarah said, overwhelmed by the complexity of the decision she faced. "It's generous beyond anything I could have imagined, but it's also more complicated than I initially understood." Chief Iron Bear's response demonstrated the patience and wisdom that had made him an effective leader. "Decisions of such importance should not be made hastily. We will leave the horses here for you to observe and consider. Take whatever time you need to understand what accepting them would mean." The practical arrangement he proposed was both generous and diplomatically astute. By leaving the horses for her evaluation, the Kiowa delegation was providing an opportunity for Sarah to assess their quality and consider the implications of ownership without pressure to make an immediate decision. "Joseph will remain with you to help care for the horses and answer any questions you might have," Steel Arrow added. He knows each animal's individual characteristics and can help you understand their capabilities and needs. The prospect of having Joseph's company again pleased Sarah, though she wondered whether his presence was intended to influence her decision or simply to provide practical assistance. Either way, his knowledge of the horses would be invaluable in helping her make an informed choice. As the Kiowa delegation prepared to depart, leaving behind the magnificent horses and young Joseph, Chief Iron Bear approached Sarah one final time. His weathered face carried the expression of someone imparting wisdom earned through decades of leadership experience. "Young woman," he said quietly, "I have lived through many changes in the relationship between our peoples. I have seen friendship and conflict, cooperation and betrayal, hope and disappointment. What I have learned is that individual actions matter more than the policies of governments or the prejudices of communities." His words carried weight that suggested personal experience with the consequences of both good and bad decisions in intercultural relations. Sarah sensed that he was sharing insights that had been shaped by events she could only imagine. "Your kindness to Joseph represents the kind of action that can change hearts and minds on both sides," Chief Iron Bear continued. "By accepting our gift, you would demonstrate that friendship between our peoples is possible and valuable. By declining it, you would still have our respect, but you would miss an opportunity to show others that cooperation benefits everyone." The moral dimension of the choice added another layer of complexity to Sarah's decision. Accepting the horses would position her as a symbol of successful intercultural cooperation, while declining them might be interpreted as rejection of the very friendship they were meant to represent. As the delegation rode away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the sounds of departure, Sarah found herself alone with Joseph and 40 of the finest horses she had ever seen. The magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in as she realized that her simple act of feeding a hungry child had led to circumstances that would define the rest of her life. The horses grazed peacefully in her makeshift corral, their presence transforming her modest homestead into something that resembled a prosperous ranch. Their value exceeded anything she had ever owned, while their symbolic significance carried implications that extended far beyond personal wealth. Joseph's excitement was obvious as he moved among the animals, checking their condition and explaining their individual characteristics. His knowledge of each horse was encyclopedic, revealing the deep connection between the Kiowa people and their equine partners. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his young voice carrying adult seriousness, "these horses represent the finest our people have to offer. Chief Iron Bear has never before authorized such a gift to anyone outside our tribe. This is history being made." The weight of historical significance added another dimension to Sarah's decision. Her choice would not only affect her own future, but would also establish precedents for intercultural relations that could influence other interactions between Native Americans and settlers throughout the territory. As the sun climbed toward its midday position, bringing with it the familiar oppressive heat of the continuing drought, Sarah began to understand that her quiet life as an isolated homesteader was about to end forever. Whether she accepted or declined the Kiowa offer, the events of the past few days had transformed her from an anonymous settler into a key figure in the complex dynamics of frontier society. The 40 war horses that grazed peacefully in her corral represented far more than simple wealth or even cultural friendship. They embodied the possibility that cooperation between different peoples could transcend the conflicts that seemed to define so much of frontier life. The decision she faced would determine whether that possibility became reality or remained merely an inspiring dream that failed to achieve lasting significance. The first night with 40 war horses grazing outside her cabin was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The animals moved like shadows in the moonlight, their occasional snorts and whinnies creating a symphony that spoke of power barely contained. Thunder Runner, the magnificent black stallion, had positioned himself near the cabin as though assuming guardianship duties that extended beyond simple grazing. Joseph had constructed a temporary shelter for himself in the barn loft, but spent most of the evening moving among the horses, checking their condition and speaking to them in the musical Kiowa language that seemed to calm even the most spirited animals. His knowledge of each horse's personality and history revealed the deep bonds that existed between the Kiowa people and their equine partners. "That mare there, the paint with the white blaze, her name is Swift Cloud," Joseph explained as they watched the horses settle for the night. "She carried my cousin through 3 battles against the Pawnee, never faltering even when wounded by arrows. She knows the sound of gunfire and the smell of blood, but she has never shown fear." Each horse carried similar stories of courage, loyalty, and partnership that had shaped Kiowa military success for generations. These were not merely valuable animals, but living repositories of tribal history and culture whose presence at Sarah's homestead represented trust that transcended simple monetary value. The practical challenges of caring for 40 horses quickly became apparent. Water consumption alone required Sarah to pump the well continuously throughout the day, while feed requirements exceeded anything her modest operation could sustain long-term. The animals were accustomed to prairie grass, supplemented by occasional grain, but the drought had eliminated most natural forage in the immediate area. "We'll need to move them to better grazing soon," Joseph observed, surveying the barren landscape around the homestead. "There's good grass about 10 miles north, near Cottonwood Creek, but keeping them there would require constant watching to prevent theft or stampeding." The logistical complexities of horse ownership on such a scale had never occurred to Sarah during her initial consideration of the Kiowa offer. Managing 40 horses would require knowledge, resources, and assistance that she currently lacked, while the economic benefits would depend on successfully marketing animals whose value she was only beginning to understand. More troubling were the social implications that became apparent as neighbors began arriving to investigate reports of unusual activity at the Mitchell homestead. Word of the Kiowa delegation's visit had spread quickly through the sparse settler community, creating curiosity mixed with suspicion about Sarah's involvement in tribal affairs. The first visitor was Henry Morrison, a neighboring rancher whose property lay 15 miles east of Sarah's claim. His arrival on the second morning, accompanied by 2 armed men, suggested concerns that went beyond casual neighborly interest. Morrison's reputation for hostility toward Native Americans was well known throughout the district, and his presence boded ill for peaceful resolution of potential conflicts. "Morning, Sarah," Morrison said, his tone carrying false friendliness that barely concealed underlying hostility. "Heard you had some interesting visitors yesterday. Folks are wondering what kind of business you might be conducting with hostile Indians." The accusation stung because it misrepresented both Sarah's actions and the nature of her relationship with Joseph's family. Her assistance to a starving child had been characterized as collaboration with enemy forces, demonstrating the prejudice that made intercultural cooperation dangerous for everyone involved. "I helped a lost boy who was starving," Sarah replied firmly, refusing to accept Morrison's characterization of recent events. "His family came to thank me for my kindness. There's nothing hostile or suspicious about showing gratitude for humanitarian assistance." Morrison's examination of the magnificent horses revealed both his expertise in evaluating quality livestock and his suspicion about how Sarah had acquired such valuable animals. His experience as a rancher made it impossible for him to dismiss the horses as ordinary stock, while his prejudices made it difficult for him to accept that Native Americans would voluntarily part with such wealth. "These are war horses, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying implications that made his companions shift nervously in their saddles. Animals trained for fighting, not farming. Why would Indians give you cavalry mounts unless they expected you to use them against other whites? The suggestion that she might be planning military action against her own people was so absurd that Sarah almost laughed, but Morrison's serious expression and his companions' alert postures made clear that they considered the possibility genuine. The gulf between reality and prejudiced assumptions created communication barriers that rational discussion couldn't easily bridge. These horses were given as gifts to honor my kindness toward a child, Sarah explained patiently. They're valuable because the Kiowa people wanted to demonstrate their appreciation for someone who showed compassion when compassion was needed. Morrison's skepticism was evident in his expression and tone. Indians don't give away their best horses to white women out of the goodness of their hearts. There's got to be some other arrangement, some understanding about what they expect in return. The conversation revealed assumptions about Native American motivations that made genuine understanding impossible. Morrison's worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that tribal peoples might act from generosity or honor, requiring him to search for hidden motives that confirmed his existing prejudices. Joseph, who had been listening from the barn doorway, approached with the dignified bearing that had impressed Sarah from their first meeting. His presence immediately increased tension as Morrison and his companions regarded him with the suspicion typically reserved for potential threats. "Sir," Joseph said, addressing Morrison with careful courtesy, "I am the boy Mrs. Mitchell helped when I was starving. These horses were given by my people to honor her kindness. There is no conspiracy or hidden purpose, only gratitude for someone who showed mercy to a child in need." Morrison's response revealed the depth of his prejudice and his unwillingness to consider Native American perspectives as valid. "Boy, I don't know what lies your people have told you to say, but decent white folks know better than to trust Indian promises or Indian gold." The insult to both Joseph's intelligence and his family's honor created a moment of dangerous tension. Sarah could see the boy struggling to maintain the respectful demeanor his upbringing demanded while facing deliberate provocation designed to create the kind of incident that Morrison could use to justify violence. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah intervened firmly, "Joseph is my guest, and I'll thank you for treating him with the courtesy I would expect any visitor to receive. If you have concerns about my actions, you can discuss them with me directly rather than insulting a child." Her defense of Joseph surprised Morrison, who apparently expected white solidarity against Native American interests, regardless of circumstances. Sarah's willingness to take sides against other whites in favor of an Indian boy challenged assumptions about racial loyalty that formed the foundation of his worldview. "Sarah, you're making a mistake that could get people killed," Morrison said, his tone becoming more threatening. "When word gets around about your Indian sympathies, folks are going to start wondering whose side you're really on. That's not a question you want people asking in times like these." The implicit threat was clear, though carefully phrased to avoid direct menace that might justify retaliation. Morrison was warning Sarah that her association with Native Americans could result in social ostracism or worse consequences from whites who viewed such relationships as treacherous. As Morrison and his companions departed, their parting glances at the horses and pointed comments about reporting suspicious activities to territorial authorities made clear that Sarah's troubles were just beginning. The magnificent gift that Chief Iron Bear had intended as recognition of her nobility was becoming the source of suspicion and hostility from her own community. "Mrs. Mitchell," Joseph said quietly after the men had ridden away, "perhaps I should take the horses and return to my people. I don't want my presence to create danger for you." The boy's concern for her welfare, despite the risks he would face. Traveling alone with such valuable animals touched Sarah deeply. His willingness to sacrifice the reunion with his family in order to protect her from consequences of her own generosity revealed a character that put adult behavior to shame. "You're not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly. "I won't let prejudice and ignorance drive away someone who has done nothing wrong. Besides, those horses need proper care, and you're the only one who knows how to provide it." Her decision to stand by Joseph and the horses represented a conscious choice to accept whatever consequences might follow, rather than abandon principles that defined her character. The isolation she had experienced as a widow would be nothing compared to the ostracism that awaited someone branded as an Indian sympathizer in territorial society. The next few days brought additional visitors whose reactions ranged from curiosity to hostility, but none who could appreciate the cultural significance of what had occurred. Reverend Johnson from Cedar Ridge arrived with concerns about Sarah's spiritual welfare, warning that association with heathen influences could endanger her soul along with her reputation. "Sarah, my dear," the elderly minister said with genuine concern, "I understand your charitable impulses, but we must be careful not to let misguided compassion lead us into fellowship with those who reject Christian civilization. The Lord calls us to help the less fortunate, but not at the expense of our own salvation." His theological objections to her actions created additional complications that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Religious opposition to intercultural cooperation added moral dimensions to what she had considered purely humanitarian assistance, forcing her to choose between community approval and personal conscience. "Reverend, I fed a hungry child," Sarah replied with patience that required considerable effort. "I can't believe that showing mercy to someone in need could be against God's will, regardless of that person's race or religion." The minister's response revealed theological perspectives that used religious doctrine to justify racial prejudice. "The scriptures teach us to help our own people first, Sarah. Charity that weakens Christian communities in order to assist those who might use such help against us serves Satan's purposes rather than God's plan." These conversations exhausted Sarah both emotionally and intellectually, as they required her to defend actions that seemed obviously moral against arguments that twisted religious and social principles to support conclusions she found repugnant. The mental energy required to maintain her position while remaining civil to critics began taking a toll that affected her physical health. Joseph observed these interactions with the keen intelligence that had impressed Sarah from their first meeting. His understanding of white society's complexity grew as he witnessed the various ways that fear and prejudice could manifest themselves in people who considered themselves moral and civilized. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said one evening as they watched the horses graze in the fading light, "my uncle Steel Arrow warned me that some white people would react badly to our gift. He said that kindness between different peoples sometimes frightens those who profit from hatred and conflict." The boys' mature understanding of social dynamics impressed Sarah while highlighting the sophistication of Kiowa analysis of white society. Joseph's education had prepared him to navigate cultural complexity that many adults never mastered, revealing educational traditions that produced remarkable results. "What else did your uncle tell you about how people might react?" Sarah asked, curious about Kiowa predictions regarding the consequences of their generous gesture. Joseph's answer revealed strategic thinking that extended beyond immediate circumstances to longer-term implications of intercultural cooperation. He said that some whites would try to use our gift against you, claiming that accepting it made you disloyal to your own people. But he also said that others would see the truth and respect you for showing courage in the face of criticism. The accuracy of Steel Arrow's predictions became evident as more neighbors arrived to investigate the situation at Sarah's homestead. Some, like Morrison, arrived with hostility and suspicion that made productive conversation impossible. Others came with genuine curiosity about events that challenged their assumptions about Indian-white relations. Among the latter was Dr. William Hayes, a physician who served the scattered homesteads throughout the region. His arrival on the fourth day brought both medical expertise and intellectual perspective that provided welcome relief from previous confrontational encounters. "Sarah," Dr. Hayes said, after examining the horses with obvious appreciation for their quality, "I've heard various versions of what happened here. Would you mind telling me the actual story so I can separate fact from fiction?" His request for accurate information rather than confirmation of predetermined assumptions marked him as someone capable of objective evaluation. Sarah's account of her assistance to Joseph and the subsequent gift ceremony received careful attention that suggested genuine interest in understanding rather than judging. "Remarkable," Dr. Hayes said when she finished. "I've treated enough frontier injuries to know good horses when I see them, and these animals represent extraordinary value. The cultural significance of such a gift must be equally extraordinary." His recognition of both material and symbolic dimensions of the Kiowa gesture demonstrated sophisticated understanding that had been absent from previous visitors. Dr. Hayes's medical background had apparently provided exposure to different cultures that enabled appreciation for complex motivations and customs. "What concerns me," he continued, "is the reaction you're likely to face from people who can't distinguish between legitimate friendship and dangerous collaboration. The political climate regarding Indian relations has become increasingly paranoid, making reasonable cooperation difficult even when it would benefit everyone involved." His warning echoed Steel Arrow's predictions, while adding medical perspective on the psychological factors that drove extreme reactions to intercultural cooperation. Dr. Hayes had observed how fear and prejudice could overcome rational analysis, creating social dynamics that punished exactly the kind of behavior that might reduce conflict. "My advice," he said carefully, "is to document everything about how you acquired these horses. Write down the circumstances, get witnesses if possible, and keep records that prove the legitimate nature of your relationship with Joseph's family. You may need such evidence if questions arise about your loyalty or activities." The practical nature of his suggestions impressed Sarah, as they demonstrated understanding of legal and political realities that could affect her future safety. Dr. Hayes' medical practice had apparently taught him to anticipate problems and prepare defenses against accusations that might arise from misunderstood situations. That evening, as Sarah sat on her porch watching the magnificent horses that had transformed her modest homestead into something resembling a prosperous ranch, she finally reached the decision that had been building since Chief Iron Bear's dramatic visit. The horses represented more than wealth or even cultural friendship. They embodied the possibility that cooperation between different peoples could transcend the hatred and conflict that seemed to define so much of frontier life. Accepting the horses would position her as a symbol of successful intercultural cooperation, while declining them might be interpreted as rejection of the very friendship they were meant to represent. More importantly, keeping the horses would demonstrate that kindness could be rewarded rather than punished, providing hope for others who might consider similar acts of compassion. "Joseph," she called to the boy who was checking the horses, "water supply for the final time that day. Tomorrow morning, we're going to start building proper corrals for our horses. It's time I accepted your uncle's gift officially and learned how to be a proper horse rancher." Joseph's joy at her decision was immediate and obvious, his face lit with the kind of happiness that came from seeing justice triumph over prejudice, while his excited response revealed how much her acceptance meant to him personally. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have made the best decision possible," he said, his young voice carrying adult conviction. These horses will bring you prosperity and protection, while your acceptance will show others that friendship between our peoples is both possible and profitable. As the stars emerged in the clear Kansas sky, Sarah realized that her quiet life as an isolated homesteader was indeed ending forever. But instead of loss, she felt anticipation for the adventures that lay ahead as the owner of 40 magnificent war horses and the friend of a proud Native American nation whose respect she had earned through simple acts of human decency. The drought that had brought such hardship to her region would soon break. But the relationships forged during those difficult days would endure long after the rains returned and the prairie bloomed once again with the promise of better times ahead. The construction of proper horse facilities began at dawn on Sarah's 5th day as owner of 40 war horses. Joseph had spent the previous evening sketching designs in the dirt, combining traditional Kiowa knowledge of horse management with practical adaptations for permanent settlement. His plans called for multiple corrals that would allow separation of stallions from mares, isolation areas for sick or injured animals, and covered shelters that could protect valuable stock during severe weather. The Kiowa way is to move with the horses, following grass and water as the seasons change, Joseph explained as they marked locations for fence posts. But since you must stay in one place, we need to bring the grass and water to them, or create ways to move them safely to where those things exist. His understanding of both traditional and settled approaches to horse management impressed Sarah, revealing educational depth that prepared young Kiowa men for success in either nomadic or agricultural lifestyles. The boy's ability to adapt ancestral knowledge to new circumstances demonstrated the flexibility that would be essential for survival in a rapidly changing world. The work itself proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. Digging post holes in drought-hardened ground required strength and endurance that pushed her physical limits, while splitting rails and constructing gates demanded carpentry skills she had never developed. Without Joseph's assistance, the project would have been impossible for a woman working alone. "Mrs. Mitchell," Joseph observed as she struggled with a particularly stubborn fence post, "among my people, construction work like this is shared by the entire community. No one is expected to build alone what requires many hands to complete properly." His gentle suggestion carried implications about community cooperation that highlighted the isolation characteristic of white settlement patterns. Individual homesteading, while promoting self-reliance, also created situations where necessary work exceeded individual capabilities. Their labors were interrupted on the 2nd day by the arrival of an unexpected visitor whose presence created immediate tension. Captain James Bradley of the 7th Cavalry rode up to the homestead with the formal bearing of someone conducting official business rather than making a social call. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust and heat, while his equipment reflected the high standards expected of regular Army officers. "Ma'am," Captain Bradley said, dismounting with military precision, "I'm investigating reports of unusual activities in this area. Specifically, I've been told that you're harboring stolen government property and maintaining unauthorized contact with hostile Indians." The accusations struck Sarah like physical blows, revealing how quickly gossip and prejudice could transform humanitarian assistance into criminal activity. Morrison's threats about reporting suspicious activities to territorial authorities had apparently resulted in an official investigation that could destroy her reputation and freedom. "Captain, I'm caring for a Kiowa boy whose family gave me horses, as thanks for helping him when he was starving," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite growing fear. "There's nothing stolen or hostile about showing gratitude for kindness." Captain Bradley's examination of the horses revealed professional expertise that enabled accurate assessment of their quality and value. His expression grew increasingly serious as he recognized the exceptional nature of the animals grazing in Sarah's makeshift corrals. "Ma'am, these are military-quality mounts worth more than most settlers see in a lifetime," he said. "I find it difficult to believe that Indians would voluntarily surrender such valuable assets to a white woman without expecting something significant in return." His skepticism echoed Morrison's suspicions while carrying the additional weight of official authority. Captain Bradley's position as cavalry officer made his doubts about Sarah's story potentially dangerous, as military conclusions about her activities could result in arrest and prosecution for crimes she hadn't committed. Joseph stepped forward with the dignified bearing that had impressed every adult who met him. His presence immediately caught Captain Bradley's attention, as the boy's obvious health and respectful demeanor contradicted expectations about how hostile Indians might behave. "Sir," Joseph said, addressing the officer with careful courtesy, "I am Joseph Crowfeather, son of Grey Eagle of the Kiowa Nation. This woman saved my life when I was lost and starving. My people gave these horses to honor her courage and kindness." Captain Bradley's response revealed professional training that enabled recognition of truth when presented clearly and directly. His years of frontier service had taught him to distinguish between genuine Native American dignity and the theatrical posturing that characterized criminals attempting deception. "Son, that's quite a story," the captain said, his tone softening slightly. "But I'm going to need more evidence than your word to satisfy my superiors about the legitimacy of this situation." The requirement for official documentation created complications that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Her decision to help a starving child had been spontaneous and humanitarian, leaving no paper trail that could satisfy bureaucratic demands for proof of legitimate activities. "What kind of evidence would satisfy your investigation?" Sarah asked, hoping to find ways to demonstrate the truth of events that defied easy documentation. Captain Bradley's answer revealed the complex legal environment surrounding Indian-white relations in territorial Kansas. "I'll need statements from witnesses who can verify your account, documentation of any official tribal authorization for gift-giving, and assurance that you're not planning to use these animals for activities that might threaten territorial security." The bureaucratic requirements seemed designed to make legitimate intercultural cooperation impossible rather than simply regulating dangerous activities. Sarah began to understand why so few positive relationships developed between racial communities, when legal frameworks assumed hostile intent behind every interaction. "Captain," she said carefully, "I helped a hungry child because it was the right thing to do. His family thanked me in the way their culture considers appropriate. I'm not planning any activities beyond learning to manage horses and perhaps establishing a breeding operation that could benefit the entire region." Her explanation of future plans seemed to interest Captain Bradley more than her account of past events. "A breeding operation using Indian horses could indeed benefit regional development," he admitted. "Quality stock is always in demand, and these animals could improve bloodlines throughout the territory." The economic implications of Sarah's horse acquisition provided common ground that transcended racial suspicions. Captain Bradley's military experience had taught him to appreciate the practical value of superior horses, while his understanding of territorial development needs enabled recognition of potential benefits. "However," he continued, "I'll still need official documentation to close this investigation satisfactorily. Can you arrange for tribal representatives to provide written statements about the circumstances surrounding this gift?" The request for formal tribal documentation created new challenges that required diplomatic skills Sarah didn't possess. Asking Chief Iron Bear to provide written justification for his generous gesture might be interpreted as questioning his authority or doubting his sincerity. Joseph's response demonstrated understanding of both military requirements and tribal protocols that could help resolve the documentation dilemma. "Captain, my uncle Steel Arrow speaks excellent English and has dealt with military authorities before. He could provide the kind of statement you need if approached with proper respect for tribal sovereignty." The boy's sophisticated understanding of diplomatic protocols impressed Captain Bradley while providing a practical solution to bureaucratic requirements. His suggestion demonstrated the kind of intercultural knowledge that could facilitate cooperation if given opportunity to develop. "That might work," Captain Bradley agreed. "If this Steel Arrow can provide credible documentation of tribal authorization for the horse gift, and if Mrs. Mitchell can demonstrate legitimate plans for using the animals, I can probably satisfy my superiors that no security threat exists." The possibility of official approval for her activities encouraged Sarah while highlighting the complex legal environment that governed frontier relationships. Success would require not only maintaining good relations with Kiowa leadership, but also satisfying territorial authorities whose suspicions could easily be renewed by political changes or social pressures. Captain Bradley's departure left Sarah and Joseph with new challenges that went beyond simple horse management. The need for official documentation of their relationship forced recognition that private acts of kindness had public consequences that required careful management to avoid dangerous misunderstandings. "Mrs. Mitchell," Joseph said thoughtfully, "I think my uncle expected something like this to happen. He has experience dealing with military officers and government officials who don't understand our customs. He probably already has the papers Captain Bradley needs." The boy's confidence in his uncle's foresight provided reassurance that the documentation crisis might be resolved more easily than Sarah had feared. Steel Arrow's diplomatic experience and understanding of white bureaucracy would be invaluable assets in navigating official requirements. Their conversation was interrupted by sounds of approaching riders whose numbers suggested another significant delegation. As the dust cloud resolved into individual figures, Sarah recognized Steel Arrow leading a group that included several warriors she remembered from Chief Iron Bear's original visit. Steel Arrow's arrival proved perfectly timed to address the documentation issues raised by Captain Bradley's investigation. His saddlebags contained formal papers prepared in both English and Kiowa that documented tribal authorization for the horse gift, established Sarah's status as a friend of the Kiowa nation, and provided a legal framework for her possession of animals that might otherwise be questioned by territorial authorities. "Mrs. Mitchell," Steel Arrow said, dismounting with his characteristic fluid grace, "I have brought the papers that white officials require to understand what our actions mean. These documents establish your rights and our respect in language that satisfies both cultures." The foresight demonstrated by his preparation impressed Sarah while revealing the strategic thinking that made Steel Arrow valuable to his people. As a diplomatic representative, his understanding of white bureaucratic requirements enabled him to protect intercultural relationships from misunderstandings that could destroy cooperative arrangements. The documents themselves were masterpieces of diplomatic language that satisfied legal requirements while maintaining tribal dignity. Written statements from Chief Iron Bear, Steel Arrow, and other tribal leaders established the ceremonial nature of the horse gift while providing official authorization that territorial authorities could accept without losing face. These papers also establish protocols for future cooperation between you and our people, Steel Arrow explained. They create a legal framework for trade relationships, mutual assistance agreements, and cultural exchanges that could benefit both communities. The broader implications of the documentation revealed Steel Arrow's vision for expanding intercultural cooperation beyond isolated acts of individual kindness. His papers laid groundwork for systematic relationships that could transform regional dynamics if properly developed and maintained. Joseph's reunion with his uncle provided an opportunity for detailed discussion of events that had occurred during their separation. Their conversation, conducted in rapid Kiowa, clearly covered more than simple family matters, as Steel Arrow's expressions revealed concern about developments that extended beyond immediate circumstances. "Joseph tells me that some of your neighbors have shown hostility toward your friendship with our people," Steel Arrow said when their private conversation concluded. "This is unfortunate, but not unexpected. Change always frightens those who profit from old ways of doing things." His analysis of community reactions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of social dynamics that governed frontier relationships. Steel Arrow's diplomatic experience had taught him to anticipate resistance to cooperation, while developing strategies that could overcome prejudice through demonstrated benefits. "What he also tells me," Steel Arrow continued, "is that you have shown courage in defending both him and the principles that guided your original kindness. This confirms our assessment of your character and strengthens our commitment to supporting your success with these horses." The tribal leader's approval of Sarah's handling of community pressures provided encouragement while highlighting the ongoing challenges she would face as owner of valuable animals given by Native Americans. Her success would require continuous courage in facing criticism from those who opposed intercultural cooperation. "To help ensure your success," Steel Arrow announced, "we have decided to provide additional assistance beyond the original gift. Joseph will remain with you for as long as needed to help establish proper horse management practices, while other young men will visit regularly to provide labor for construction projects and seasonal activities." The offer of ongoing support transformed the horse gift from a single generous gesture into a comprehensive partnership that could address practical challenges Sarah faced as a woman working alone. Kiowa assistance would enable her to develop horse ranching capabilities that individual effort could never achieve. More significantly, Steel Arrow's announcement revealed tribal commitment to her success that transcended simple gratitude for past kindness. The Kiowa leadership had apparently decided that supporting Sarah's horse ranching operation served broader interests in demonstrating the benefits of intercultural cooperation. "There is one condition," Steel Arrow added, his tone becoming more serious. "The success of this arrangement depends on maintaining relationships that honor both cultures, while demonstrating to others that cooperation benefits everyone involved. You will be representing not only yourself, but also the possibility that different peoples can work together productively." The responsibility of serving as a symbol for intercultural cooperation added pressure that Sarah hadn't anticipated when she first fed a hungry boy behind her barn. Her personal success or failure would influence how others viewed the potential for peaceful relationships between racial communities throughout the territory. As evening approached and Steel Arrow's delegation prepared to establish camp near the homestead, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary changes that had transformed her life in just 1 week. The isolated widow, struggling to survive drought and economic hardship, had become the owner of magnificent horses and the center of intercultural cooperation that could influence frontier development for years to come. The horses themselves had adapted quickly to their new environment, finding adequate grazing in areas Joseph identified through traditional knowledge of prairie ecology. Their presence had already begun attracting attention from travelers who recognized quality stock and inquired about availability for purchase or breeding services. "Mrs. Mitchell," Joseph said, as they watched Thunder Runner lead the herd to water, "my uncle says that accepting our gift has made you part of our extended family. Among the Kiowa, family members have obligations to help each other succeed, just as they have rights to expect support when support is needed." The concept of extended family relationships that transcended racial boundaries provided a new framework for understanding the partnership that was developing. Sarah's acceptance of the horses had created kinship bonds that carried both privileges and responsibilities she was only beginning to comprehend. As stars emerged in the clear Kansas sky, Sarah realized that her simple act of compassion had initiated changes that extended far beyond her individual circumstances. The relationships forged through feeding a starving child were reshaping community dynamics, challenging racial prejudices, and creating possibilities for cooperation that could transform the entire region. The drought that had brought such hardship was finally beginning to show signs of breaking, with evening clouds that promised relief from the oppressive heat that had dominated the summer. But even if rain never came again, Sarah knew that her life had been permanently enriched by discovering that kindness could indeed change the world, one hungry child at a time. 5 years later, the Mitchell Horse Ranch had become legendary throughout Kansas Territory and beyond. What began as 40 magnificent war horses had multiplied into the largest and most respected breeding operation west of the Mississippi River. Thunder Runner's offspring commanded premium prices from cavalry units, wealthy ranchers, and horse enthusiasts who traveled hundreds of miles to acquire animals bearing the distinctive bloodlines that made Mitchell horses synonymous with excellence. Sarah stood on the porch of her expanded ranch house, watching Joseph, now 18, and her full business partner work with a group of young horses in the main training corral. His expertise had grown to match that of the finest horsemen in either culture, while his bilingual abilities made him invaluable in negotiations with buyers from diverse backgrounds. The skinny, desperate boy, who had once hidden behind her barn, had become a confident young man whose reputation extended throughout the frontier. The drought had broken dramatically in the autumn of 1872, with rains that transformed the prairie from brown wasteland into rolling seas of green grass. The return of abundant water and forage had enabled expansion of the horse operation beyond anything Sarah had initially imagined possible. Natural springs discovered on her property during well-digging operations provided reliable water sources that supported hundreds of animals year-round. More importantly, the Mitchell Ranch had become an unofficial embassy where Kiowa and white communities conducted business, resolved disputes, and developed relationships that transcended traditional racial boundaries. Dr. Hayes had established a medical clinic on the property, treating patients from both cultures while training apprentices in combined traditional and modern healing techniques. Reverend Johnson, initially opposed to intercultural cooperation, now conducted services that welcomed congregation members regardless of their ancestry. The legal framework that Steel Arrow had established through his diplomatic papers had evolved into comprehensive treaties that protected intercultural commerce throughout the region. Sarah's success had inspired similar partnerships in neighboring territories, creating a network of cooperation that challenged federal policies based on segregation and conflict. Mrs. Mitchell, called Maria Santos, a Mexican-American woman who managed the ranch's administrative operations. The delegation from Colorado has arrived. They want to purchase 50 horses for their new cavalry regiment. Such large-scale military contracts had become routine as word of Mitchell horse. Quality spread throughout the Western Territories. The irony that horses originally given by Kiowa warriors were now being sold to the U.S. Army was not lost on Sarah, though she preferred to focus on the practical benefits that such sales brought to all parties involved. The Colorado delegation's leader, Colonel Harrison, had served with distinction during the Civil War and understood horse quality better than most buyers. His examination of the animals available for purchase revealed professional appreciation that transcended any reservations he might have had about their origins. "Ma'am, these are the finest horses I've seen in 20 years of military service," he declared after completing his inspection. Whatever breeding and training methods you're using have produced animals that exceed Army standards in every category. Sarah's response reflected the diplomatic skills she had developed through years of managing complex intercultural relationships. Colonel, our success comes from combining the best knowledge from multiple traditions. Kiowa's understanding of horse nature merged with modern breeding science creates results that neither approach could achieve alone. The explanation satisfied the colonel's curiosity while crediting both cultures for contributions to the ranch's success. Such balanced acknowledgement had become Sarah's standard approach to questions about her methods, ensuring that no party felt excluded from recognition they deserved. Joseph joined the conversation with the easy confidence that characterized his interactions with authority figures from any background. Colonel, if you'd like to see our training methods in action, I can demonstrate how we prepare horses for military service while maintaining the spirit that makes them exceptional partners. His offer reflected the educational programs that had become another source of ranch income and influence. Horsemen from throughout the region came to learn techniques that produced superior results, while young people from both cultures found employment and training that prepared them for success in the expanding frontier economy. The demonstration that followed showcased training methods that combined Kiowa understanding of horse psychology with military requirements for discipline and reliability. Joseph's ability to communicate with horses seemed almost supernatural to observers unfamiliar with traditional Native American approaches to animal partnership. Remarkable, Colonel Harrison observed as Joseph guided a young stallion through complex maneuvers using only voice commands and subtle body language. I've never seen horses respond so willingly to human direction while maintaining their natural spirit and intelligence. The colonel's appreciation reflected broader recognition that Mitchell Ranch training methods produced superior results because they respected rather than broke the horse's natural instincts. This philosophy had attracted attention from educators and animal behaviorists who saw applications extending beyond simple horse training. As the Colorado delegation completed their purchases and prepared for departure, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate widow to successful businesswoman whose influence extended throughout the American West. The simple act of feeding a hungry child had created ripple effects that continued expanding. Years after the original deed, Steel Arrow, now recognized as a leading advocate for peaceful intercultural relations, had been appointed as official liaison between tribal governments and territorial authorities. His diplomatic success had prevented numerous conflicts while facilitating cooperation that benefited all parties involved. His regular visits to the ranch provided opportunities to assess progress and plan future developments. Sarah, he said, during his most recent visit, what you have accomplished here proves that different peoples can work together successfully when they approach each other with respect and good faith. Your ranch has become a model that influences policy discussions in Washington and inspires similar efforts throughout the frontier. Chief Iron Bear, now in his 70s, had lived to see his vision of intercultural cooperation validated through tangible success that skeptics could not dismiss. His final visit to the ranch, shortly before his death in the winter of 1876, had been marked by satisfaction in seeing his investment in Sarah's character produce results that exceeded even his optimistic expectations. The broader impact of the Mitchell Ranch extended far beyond horse breeding and training. The success of intercultural cooperation at the ranch had inspired changes in federal Indian policy that emphasized education and economic development over military suppression. Young Native Americans from various tribes came to learn modern business methods while sharing traditional knowledge that enriched everyone's understanding. Sarah's own transformation from isolated homesteader to regional leader had been gradual but profound. Her confidence in addressing complex political and social issues had grown through necessity as her ranch became a focal point for intercultural relations. Her testimony before congressional committees investigating frontier conditions had influenced legislation that protected rights of both Native Americans and cooperative whites. The personal costs of her choices had been significant but ultimately worthwhile. Henry Morrison and others who opposed intercultural cooperation had eventually found themselves isolated as the benefits of Sarah's approach became undeniable. Economic prosperity and social stability had replaced the conflict and suspicion that previously characterized regional relationships. Joseph's own story had become legend throughout Kiowa territory and beyond. The starving boy who had been saved by a white woman's kindness had grown into a successful businessman whose achievements challenged every stereotype about Native American capabilities. His planned marriage to Elizabeth Hartwell, daughter of a prominent Kansas merchant family, would create another bridge between communities that demonstrated the possibility of genuine integration. As autumn arrived in 1877, bringing 5 years, a full circle, since that desperate July morning when Sarah first discovered footprints behind her barn, she stood once again watching horses graze in the fading light. But now, hundreds of magnificent animals occupied pastures that stretched across thousands of acres, while dozens of employees from both cultures worked together in harmony that had once seemed impossible. The ranch's success had created employment and opportunity that supported several hundred families throughout the region. The prosperity generated by horse sales had funded schools, medical facilities, and infrastructure improvements that benefited everyone regardless of their cultural background. "Mrs. Mitchell," Joseph said, approaching with the easy familiarity of family relationship, "Steel Arrow sent word that your story is being written down by scholars who want to preserve it for future generations. They say it demonstrates how individual acts of kindness can change the course of history." The idea that her simple decision to feed a hungry child would be remembered by historians seemed surreal to Sarah, who had never considered herself capable of influencing events beyond her immediate circumstances. Yet the evidence of transformation surrounding her ranch made such recognition understandable, if not entirely comfortable. As stars emerged in the clear Kansas sky, Sarah understood that her greatest achievement was not the successful business she had built or the wealth she had accumulated, but the proof she had provided that cooperation could triumph over conflict when people chose courage over fear. The 40 war horses that had once seemed like an impossible gift had become the foundation for prosperity and peace that would endure long after she was gone. The boy who had knocked on Destiny's door that summer morning had found not just food for his body, but hope for his people's future. The woman who had opened that door had discovered that kindness, like seeds scattered on fertile ground, could grow into forests of possibility that provided shelter and sustenance for generations to come. In feeding one starving child, Sarah Mitchell had helped nourish the dream of an America where different peoples could build something greater together than any could achieve alone. The 40 horses had been just the beginning of a legacy that would gallop across history, carrying the message that compassion has the power to transform the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.